Hi everyone and welcome back to the channel. So in this episode of the scrap wood shed build, I'm going to be building the roof. So the majority of the wood for the roof framing will be from this scrap piece of 2x6. I started off by ripping it down. It's going to be the same dimensions as the framing of the shed. That's 2 centimeters by 3 centimeters. So I could set the fence on the table saw and rip this down in one dimension. And then I could adjust the fence and rip all the pieces down again in the other dimension. That gave me all of the framing I need for the roof. So to board out the roof, I found some OSB board. It's 15mm thick, that should be fine for the roof of this shed, so I could get the materials in the car and up to my dad's house. So this is the basic design that I come up with. The shed size is 183 centimeters by 122 centimeters, and that is a 6x4 shed. And the roof size is 195 centimeters by 142 centimeters, and that is 6'5" by 5'6". So that gives me a 10 centimeter overhang at the front and the back, and 6 centimeters either side. So I started off by measuring up and making the required cuts. And this is very similar to building the side walls of the shed, the framing. It's basically just a box with stud supports inside it. Pretty simple to do. When I'd measured one length, I would use that as a template for the next one. And then I could just screw the box together. And again, I'm using one screw on each joint just because there isn't much space to get 2 screws in. And when this is boarded over, it will all lock together nice and tight anyway. Here I'm adding the supports either side, just for the slight side overhang that I want. And then I could add the central sort of supports, spacing them equally. Doesn't matter too much on the spacing because it is a small frame. I just put enough in so that it looked right. Then my dad added some fence stain to the framework because some of it will be exposed to the outside of the shed, so this should give it a little bit of protection. Then I could just offer up the frame, and here I'm going to make marks where I want the front and back overhang to be. So I've designed it this way so that when I slide the roof onto the shed, everything will line up nice and square, and it'll be really easy to then just screw it to the frame. Where these supports are going in are exactly in line with the shed framing. To get these in a line, I could add one with a screw either side, and then the ones in between I could just toenail them in at an angle. And there you can see it's lining up nicely with the frame itself. This also got a coat of stain, and that's the main structure complete. Now for the boarding out, I needed to start off by making a cut, because I need to get these pieces square, because they're rough pieces that I've found and there isn't a square edge on them. So I made a cut on one side, and then I could measure equally either end and add a second cut. If you've got a track saw, this would be much quicker, but I don't have one. But I just free-handed these cuts because they do not need to be perfectly accurate for a small garden shed, and that worked out just fine. So I could just offer up the first piece and then get it screwed down into position, and I'm making sure that they overhang about 50% on those central supports so that I can get a board either side of the same support. That way most of the lines will be hidden by the sort of rafter supports. And I'm just adding screws with the impact driver, no pilot holes necessary, and then I could get the next piece cut. All this wood I found thrown out. I think somebody was renovating a house and this had been ripped out. So ideal for boarding out a roof. It's not the best looking wood, but it doesn't need to be. As you can see now, they line up along one of those supports where they butt together, and then I can just add the screws, making it nice and secure. This part was quite satisfying, just to see all these pieces of OSB fit together like a little jigsaw puzzle, all neat and square. And now the final piece could be cut. As I say, cutting these freehand wasn't a problem. I got pretty good accuracy, no need for a track saw. So that was the roof boarded out. And that's how it looks from the underside. You can see I've stained the outer parts that are going to be on the outside. So I had this breathable membrane left over from when I built my workshop about 4 years ago. And I decided to use this just for some extra protection. This will be going underneath the roofing sheet, and I stapled it in position. And there's going to be a bit of an overhang there, so I can staple it around. This isn't necessary for a small garden shed, but I just had some left over. You don't really need to use this at all, or you could use some plastic, some damp-proof course if you've got some. So if the roofing sheets fail, this is like an extra layer of protection. And it's also breathable, so the wood can vent through the roof. When you're doing this, you just need to make sure that you overlap them in the right order. Depending on the slope of the roof, you want the one at the highest point to be above the one below it, so that the rain sort of falls down off the one piece onto the next piece and not underneath it. Then I could trim off the excess with some scissors and start to wrap it around the edges. So I decided to staple it around the edges, and then I'm going to be adding some trim to cover it later on. If you'd like to see video on my workshop build. I'll leave a link to that video in the description box. Here is the trim that I cut. My dad's just giving that a coat of stain before it goes on. The trim could be screwed directly to the framing of the shed underneath, and that just hides the breathable membrane. Again, not necessary, but I thought it would look tidy this way. You could just put some cheap roofing felt straight over the OSB board if you want. So now onto these roofing sheets. So these are corrugated bitumen sheets, and I found 3 of these thrown out. They were in a car park next to a shop that had been doing some kind of renovations, and you can see there's already holes in these from when it was being used previously. So I just want to cut out the areas where the holes were, because they also put the holes in the valleys of the corrugations, and I want them to be on the peaks. So I just used the spirit level as a guide. I drew a line with a pencil and then used a handsaw to make these cuts. I've got the same sort of roof on my workshop, and when I cut the workshop roof I used a jigsaw to make these cuts, but I find that an old handsaw seems to just get a nice clean straighter cut. I added a bit of WD-40 onto the blade, and that just helps with the blade going through so it doesn't stick as much, because it really gums up the saw, this bitumen. So don't use a nice new saw if you're going to do this. And this was a slow process, but I didn't need to make too many cuts. So I'm cutting these sheets down now and then adding the appropriate overhang that I want. And then the final sheet, I could just cut down the length. So I've got 3 sheets here overlapping each other. To attach them, I'm just going to be using some drywall screws that I've got, because they're the right length, and I've got these black caps that I'm going to use. And you can see on this demonstration here, it will go through, the cap will cover the hole, and it will go straight into the OSB. So now I just needed to get these sheets lined up, and I can add plenty of overhang. I think you need 2 to 3 corrugations for overhang. I think I've got 4 or 5 here, just because I've got the material. So now I'm just marking lines for where I want to screw the screws in, and I made this jig just to help me to get everything lined up nicely against the roof, and that made things much easier. So you can buy dedicated fixings, and I did use those for my workshop, but they're quite expensive, and this is just a small garden shed and I'm trying to do it for practically nothing. So I had these black caps already lying around, and they seem to be doing the job just fine. I think they'll be fine. So when you screw through the bitumen, it kind of seals around the screw, keeping it nice and watertight. And I know these are good roofs because I've had one on my workshop now for 4 years and I've never had a leak. So I added bigger screws in the areas where I could bite through into the roof framing, just to make the roof nice and secure in case there's any heavy winds. I added a screw on each corrugation along the front and back, and then across the centre I added another 2 rows, but I staggered the screws. Once that was done, me and my dad just gave it all a coat of black gloss paint, just so it looked nicer, because it's got some kind of stain on it. I'm not sure where that came from, but it looked much better once it had a coat of black gloss, as you can see. So it's now ready to get onto the shed. This is the tricky part. It's quite heavy at this point, and of course on the day we wanted to add the roof, it was raining. So my dad and myself here just getting the roof onto the shed. You can see the cladding's not finished yet. I haven't done the video for the cladding, that'll be coming next. Once we got the lip over, we could just push it on, And as you can see now, it's quite easy to line it up all square because of the way that I've made the frame. Just needed to make a few adjustments to get it all lined up and square. So now for securing it, I'm getting my dad to just pull down on the corners there, and I'm screwing directly up through the top of the framing into the framing of the roof. That lines up nicely there. I'm not piloting the holes, I'm just driving some drywall screws straight through. I added plenty of screws so this roof is going nowhere. So that was the roof complete. Okay, so that is about it for this video. So hopefully I'll have a nice solid watertight roof for many years to come on this shed. In the next video I'll be showing how I add the cladding on to the shed, and then I'll be showing how I added the window, the door and the air vents. So please stay tuned for that. If you did find this video useful, please remember to like and also consider subscribing for more DIY related videos. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.